So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Owen Lansbury. I'm a co-founder of PreviousNext, and I currently volunteer as chair of the Drupal Association board. Before I do go further, this is not a Drupal Association talk. This is my own opinions. I am highly opinionated, but the things that I'll talk about, I often talk about with the board members as well, whether they listen to me or not. And at the end, I'll be highlighting quite a few things that you can do to assist the Drupal Association. But you might be thinking, who is this guy telling me how to run my business? And I don't like it when people tell me how to do certain things a certain way. So all I'm doing is just speaking from my experience in the digital industry. And that experience goes back 30 years now. And I always joke, would you trust this child with your $1 million project? A few people did. I actually started my first website agency in 1995 and promptly went broke trying to explain what the internet was to potential clients without actually building any projects. But that did set me up to start working for digital agency startups, both in Australia and the USA, where I rode the dot-com boom in the late 90s and luckily escaped just before the crash in 2000. And then I came back and was comforted by the corporate world of IBM's global consulting team and quickly realized that kind of life was not for me. So I spent most of the 2000s as a digital creative director and user experience consultant. And that design career was always based around working with really big clients. You might know a couple of these ones. And very ambitious projects using swathes of different technologies. But it was around 2007 I discovered this little thing called Drupal, and I realized that the types of clients I like working with would be a perfect fit for using Drupal. And I also saw a huge gap in the market in Australia where at the time Drupal was heavily used by hobbyists, and I sure was not a hobbyist. And so by early 2009, I'd convinced my co-founder Kim Pepper to join me in providing enterprise-grade Drupal services to these big complex clients, which we've now been doing for almost 16 years. So that's me. You sitting in this room, you might be an agency owner or a senior manager who's wanting to supercharge your business, or you might be a staff member who just wants to be part of a great open source company, but your managers have no idea what that means. So this talk will give you the real business reasons to talk to them. Or you might be a customer who's using Drupal and you want to know how you can sustain your business on Drupal in the long term. There's going to be many things in this talk that might apply to you as well. And why am I telling you this? Aren't you all my competitors and you're just going to use this information to beat my own company? And that's not the case at all. I want to see more companies follow an open source business model that we've proven to work at PreviousNext, and for you to become really great companies in your own right. The more high-performing companies are offering Drupal to their own customers, the better the product, the more engaged the community, and the bigger the market for Drupal services will be, from which PreviousNext will ultimately benefit. And because we're here in Asia, how big is this regional Drupal market? It is quite hard to quantify, but we know how many agencies are listed on Drupal.org. There's about 200 of those. About half of those are actually in India. And then that's about 4% of the total organizations listed on Drupal.org. And then the number of Asian sites running Drupal based on domains on builtwith.com is about 16,000. And again, that's about 4% of the global sites that builtwith.com detects running Drupal. Now, putting a figure on the economic size of the Drupal market in Asia is almost impossible without knowing the average cost per site build and the amount of revenue going through each agency. But my gut feel is it's at least $100 million. And that, again, roughly equates to about 4% of the $3.5 billion that we think is the annual economic value of Drupal projects around the world. But the Asian economy is obviously worth a lot more than that, $35 trillion or 35% of the world's total economy. And so the real message here is the huge growth potential for Drupal in this region. If Drupal in Asia can grow to 35% of the global Drupal market, then that makes it a potential billion-dollar market. So that's really exciting, but it does require agencies that are skilled and sophisticated enough to capture that potential tenfold growth. So in today's talk, what I'm going to cover is what I see as the traditional agency model, what it means to adopt open source, and the open source business model that we use at PreviousNext, that you are free to adopt to supercharge your own business and become those skilled and sophisticated agencies. There's a lot to cover, but I'll try and make some time for questions at the end, and I have put a note up for a BOF at 4 p.m. tomorrow that I'll remind you of at the end of the talk too. So let's dive into the traditional agency model as I've lived it in various roles. And our experience in starting PreviousNext is probably similar to many agencies. I had a great client opportunity through some design consulting that I was doing, convinced my co-founder Kim to jump on board, pulled a few contractors together, and we delivered a project for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation that's the biggest public TV, radio and online publisher in Australia, similar to PBS in the US. We delivered that project, had a lot of fun, made a little bit of money, and then we won another client, and that was the New South Wales state government, and we've been working for them for the past 16 years. So we suddenly had this chance to start a business where I had the design side covered and Kim covered the tech. We wanted to keep working with these big high-profile clients, and we knew that we could have a lot of fun doing that and make a bit of money in the same process. But in starting a business, I'm sure many of you have experienced, we suddenly had to think about things like payroll and operating expenses and marketing and sales pipelines. And that quickly consumed all of my time, and I kissed goodbye to my design career. And then we had to decide what technology we were really going to focus on. And I still remember Kim literally saying, why would we use Drupal when it's based on that crappy PHP? He wanted to do all the cool stuff at the time, like Python and Rails, which I presume is still cool. And so at that point, let's pretend we'd chosen the traditional agency model and found a big tech partner to partner with that would provide us with the technology that we could then build client projects on. So let's call them CMS Core. I've trademarked that name, by the way. And think of all the problems that would solve. Our big tech partner, CMS Core, would take care of the technology we used, manage hosting and support, and give us sales leads, and help us with marketing and team training. Problem solved, or problem solved. Because if we'd chosen that path, CMS Core would control the technology. As a proprietary technology, we'd have no way of fixing core issues ourselves or customizing it past a certain point for client needs. We'd be reliant on them for sales leads. Would we have any priority as a new company? Would we have any choice of the type of clients that they would feed us? And by handing over hosting and support to our big tech partner, we were missing out on potentially millions of dollars in revenue in the long term and losing any connection with our clients as their first port of call. And I can't emphasize enough here that who answers the phone for your clients when they're having a problem, that's the basis of everything that you're going to build with a client over the entirety of your relationship with them. We'd have no say in how CMS Core, the product, was marketed or to what type of clients, and limited control over how our own company was then marketed to those clients. And we'd be paying thousands of dollars in trainings, courses and certifications, and no doubt they would need renewing very frequently. And most importantly, those client relationships and master contracts would potentially be held by that big tech partner. So that would put us in this very tricky situation of a business with limited control of your client relationships and probably lots of one-off or short-term contracts. And just remember, we've given up all of that revenue from hosting and support. We'd also have no control over the technology roadmap. If CMS Core wanted to make a change, they're not going to come and ask little PreviousNext down in Australia. And what would this lead to? We'd potentially have frustrated staff who would turn up to work on a software that they have no control over, and frustrated clients locked into a technology that may or may not meet their future needs, all the while paying incredible annual licensing fees for that product. And just to put that into perspective, one of our public sector clients who's been running Drupal for over a decade very successfully, they had the classic situation of hiring a new CIO who came in and said, we're moving to this new proprietary CMS. So that was 3 years ago. and they still have nothing to show for it. In the meantime, they're still paying us to keep their sites live on Drupal, and their licensing fees for this new CMS, well, they've been paying for those since day one for the past 3 years, again with nothing to show for it. So if this client was a private company, I wouldn't have too much of an issue with it. That's their money to throw up against a wall. But this is a public organisation, and it's the Australian taxpayer who's funding that big American tech company to keep charging those licensing fees. That's our money. And if we were going to follow industry averages for a typical agency, our staff would turn over and look for new jobs every 2 to 3 years, and we'd be maybe scraping 5 to 10% profit out of the company. So even for a business that's doing 10 million in revenue, that might be $500,000 annually in profit for the stress of maintaining 30 to 40 staff to generate that type of revenue. So that all sounds like a lot of hard work for me. And if you do follow this model, what's your exit strategy as a founder? So I frequently have people say to me, oh, it must be great to run your own company. And sure, it is. But my usual response is, I don't own the company owns me. And being on the other side of 50 years old, you do need to start thinking about how you might exit at the end of your career as that looms ever closer. But getting out of a traditional agency model, what are you actually selling? You've got a company with limited control of your client relationships, relatively low profits and very high business pressures. And sure, you might slowly widen the company down, or you might even end up bankrupt. That is a very common path for a lot of independent agencies. But if you're doing comparatively well, then a bigger agency, probably one of the CMS core partner network, they're going to come along, offer you a bit of money up front, a fancy job title, and some seriously ambitious, if not unachievable, earn-out targets. In the meantime, your team gets burnt out and they leave CMS Core or the big new company that's bought you, and you're stuck with no friends working for a big company you probably hate by that time. So I can think of plenty of better ways to spend the twilight years of my career. Now, the alternative path is to adopt open source software. So you choose an open source project, let's call it Openly CMS, another one of my trademarks. And taking this path, you have full control over the software, you can offer hosting and support for that stable long-term revenue, and you've got control over your sales leads and client relationships, your marketing and team training. But of course, that brings its own challenges. How do you become experts in the technology? Do you need to outsource things like hosting and support in the short or long term? And do you even know how to manage your own clients, your own marketing, and your own team training? And in choosing an open source technology, do you actually know things like who controls the open source project? Is it really open source, or is there a single big company behind the project that's making most of the money and the decisions about it? Do clients even want to use this software in the first place? You might be wanting to work with these big complex clients, but you've chosen a glorified blogging tool, and anything enterprisey becomes a massive headache for you. And what's your agency competition like? Is the software so easy to use that anyone can download it and build things with it, and suddenly you're competing with low-cost outsourcing that can be done anywhere in the world? And most importantly, are your staff enthusiastic about working with it, or is it a buggy mess that they're always having to fix before they can actually build anything with it? So with that out of the way, let's look at what I think is an open source agency model that's sustainable, profitable, and helps your company to thrive. And of course, everyone in this room being so smart, you've chosen Drupal as the open source project to base your company on. And importantly, Drupal is truly open source, released under the GPL2 license, and everything related to it is free. There's no extra fees for certain modules you might need to make your sites work, and full control over customizing what you actually need to do. Drupal does have completely distributed control of its project governance. There's no single company behind it making most of the money and setting the direction. And sure, companies like Acquia are big players in Drupal, but they don't own Drupal in any way. And if they wanted to skill up to take control of Drupal, they would need 200 plus developers full-time, which would cost them upwards of $20 million a year. That is not going to happen anytime soon. And if you are interested in more about this, search for the blog post titled Governance in the Drupal Ecosystem. Tim, who's sitting over there, Drupal Association CEO, wrote that a couple of weeks ago because it seems that people are suddenly very interested in open source project governance after some recent events elsewhere in the open source world. So the not-for-profit Drupal Association that Tim oversees, it manages Drupal.org, all of the underlying infrastructure that Drupal's built with, and it's now embarking on global product marketing for Drupal, which Ryan's handling. And Drupal is, in turn, used by some of the world's biggest organizations who are serviced by highly credible agencies and hosting companies. And because Drupal is designed for these large-scale organizations, the barriers to competition are really high. You need to be a really great agency with talented staff to build solid Drupal projects. And I've seen so many agencies say, yeah, we do Drupal. And they just disappear into the ether after finding that they can't compete effectively with established Drupal agencies. And the reason? They never invest in building their skills or connecting with the community, and they can never attract the best Drupal talent. And I'll speak more about that later. But who pays for open source projects to get built and maintained? So Drupal's project founder, Dries, who we all heard this morning, he wrote a very important blog post a few years ago, framing it in terms of makers and takers. So he recently updated that in a new blog post called Solving the Maker-Taker Problem. I'd recommend you search for that and read it if you haven't already. And of course, clients don't need to pay for Drupal in license fees, but they do need to rely on vendors and in-house teams to maintain their platforms. And agencies, well, you can download Drupal for free and go ahead and build client projects with it. There's no limitations there. But you've all heard the classic saying that open source is free, as in puppies, easy to choose, a lot of work to keep alive. And you can be a taker. There's no rules against that. You can use Drupal for free, not contribute any code, not sponsor events like this, or provide any funding at all back to the Drupal Association. But if everyone was a taker, it's a very simple outcome. Drupal would simply cease to exist. And that would make a lot of people pretty sad. And this next section of the talk might make a couple of people in here a little bit uncomfortable. Because if you are using open source software and you don't contribute back, you are considered a taker. It's very simple. And in that original blog post, Dries goes into a lot of detail about how open source is a public good that everyone can benefit from. And Drupal is now officially recognized as a digital public good by a United Nations endorsed initiative, which we've put a lot of work into. Now, an example of this, if you look at the largely publicly funded higher education sector, 70% of the universities in the USA alone use Drupal, and it's a very similar situation in a lot of countries, including Australia. So if that digital public good of Drupal suddenly disappears through lack of contribution, universities would need to spend literally billions of dollars to retool to a new platform. The higher education sector in the US spends $27 billion on tech every year, and a good portion of that would be on Drupal. And who's paying for that? Well, largely you, the public taxpayer. And if you're a taker from an open source project, you will have helped that type of scenario unfold, not just harming Drupal, but your own public institutions and your own country's taxpayers. And thinking about it a different way, if your agency relies on open source without contributing back, you're not taking something for free and benefiting from it, you're actively undermining the software that your company relies on, harming your own business in the process. So someone very prominent in the open source world recently called a company a cancer that he said was exploiting the open source project that he'd started, and I'm sure everyone here knows what I'm referring to. Now, the ensuing public brawl is not something we'd ever want to see in the Drupal world. And Tim's blog post about governance goes into how we're trying to approach the problem, ideally with carrots, not sticks. But it is a problem we definitely share in the Drupal ecosystem, and it should be a big wake-up call to anyone that runs a company that relies on open source without contributing anything back. Now, I do disagree with Dries on one key point from his original blog post. He talks about takers having a competitive advantage over makers because They can channel funds that they don't spend on contribution into other areas that they think helps their business's bottom line. But I view it incredibly differently. You know the main reason that PreviousNext loses pitches? It's usually on price, and that's borne out by some of the recent Drupal business surveys with other great Drupal agencies. So if your company can only compete on price against a maker, where does that leave you? You start devaluing your profitability and struggle to hire good Drupal developers, putting you into a spiral where without good developers, you can't win good clients. And does that sound like a sustainable business model? And I'll finish this point by noting how many clients that we've originally pitched to and lost on price, they come back to PreviousNext after that less qualified company won the project and then botched it because they lacked the expertise to deliver it. And it's more than a few companies. So if you are only competing on price, how long will your company last before you're forced to switch to a different software platform, and how much is that going to cost your business, even if it survives? And by being, I've skipped over. So that's the negative part of my talk out of the way. The alternative is much more positive, because you can become a maker and you can still use Drupal for free. And as Dries said, being a maker is anyone who purposely and meaningfully invests in the maintenance of open source software by making engineering investments, writing documentation, fixing bugs, organizing events, and much more. And by being a maker, you help Drupal's innovation accelerate, your own team's expertise will grow, your profile as a Drupal expert will be elevated, and the best Drupal talent will want to work with you. In turn, you're going to win the best client projects. And through this, being a maker will supercharge your business. It's not a business cost, it's an investment in the software that your business relies on and in your team's expertise and stability. And as a maker, would you like your profit to quadruple and your staff retention to triple? Sounds pretty good. So let's talk about how you can supercharge your business as a maker. And I'm going to return to the PreviousNext story, because what I'm going to tell you is not some hypothetical thing I've read in a business book or on a LinkedIn post. This is our real lived experience, and whether you decided to adopt it or not, it's neither here nor there. And no, child labour is not part of this story. So like I said already, we started the same way as most agencies usually do, but we realized we could build a great business on Drupal. And if we're going to build a business, we did want it to be great, because that's what we would be devoting all of our waking hours to. I've now spent a third of my entire life since birth working in PreviousNext. So we realized very early on that in order to be great, we needed to be experts in the technology that we relied on. And we wanted to win the best long-term clients, which would mean we had a sustainable business and an engaged and stable team of expert staff. And the key to this aspiration, well, it was through Drupal contribution. Contribution helped us become experts in Drupal, helped us influence the direction of the product, and we use contribution to onboard new staff and ensure that they're working to the highest coding standards, as in turn they're being mentored by the best Drupal developers around the world. And importantly, we're a comparatively small company, but our team is working on something much bigger than we could ever achieve alone, and they can focus on things that are of real interest to them outside of just working on client projects day to day. And as a little company in Australia, they're connected into this vast global community, all working on a really strong shared goal to make the best CMS software possible. And you'll often hear of companies talking about helping their staff fulfill their professional and personal passions. And for the most part, with no cynicism, Drupal contribution has enabled PreviousNext to do exactly that. And on the flip side, having an engaged team keeps PreviousNext as a profitable company that means that we can pay industry-leading salaries alongside a range of really significant benefits like an employee ownership program. And you can go to the PreviousNext blog if you want to know more about that. And that 5 to 10% profit margin and 2 to 3 year staff retention that a normal digital agency I talked about has at the beginning of this talk, at PreviousNext our profit is quadruple, and our staff retention is triple the industry average, and we know that because as an employee-owned company, we have an annual valuation that independently benchmarks us against comparable businesses in Australia. So we're living proof that contribution is not a cost to your business. It's a key investment in your strength and competitiveness. And as I've shown here, we would definitely not be contributing to Drupal if it didn't make real business sense. We don't do it to make ourselves feel like we're doing the right thing. And it's not altruism. We do it because it helps us win the best projects, because the best clients want the best experts. This in turn means we can charge slightly higher rates and make a bit more profit. And we don't need to spend all of that money on training and other professional development activities because it's baked into our contribution approach and our connection into the Drupal community. And while we retain the best staff, we also attract the best staff. So we can be highly selective in terms of who we bring on board. And all of this leads to maintaining a consistently high Drupal certified partner ranking. So this little Australian company at the bottom of the world is ranked at the top of the contributor page on Drupal.org, ahead of companies that are literally 50 times our size. No, you don't have to clap for that. Thank you. And we just achieve that by being consistent. So contribution is baked into how we work. And this list on screen of the top 30 Drupal core contributors, 13% are from PreviousSnext. And looking at it another way, 60% of our team are in the top 100 core contributors, and 75% of them are in the top 500 out of a list of 2,600 people. So how do we do it? So the single most important thing is that this is sanctioned as policy by the company founders and senior management. So if you think you can just hope it happens and say, oh yeah, you can contribute if you want, and then just leave it be, think again. Now you might have noticed I haven't used bullet points up to this point, but feel free to take a photo of this slide. It's our top secret contribution policy. Actually, we talk about it all the time. So first up, some business basics. And this is what you can control as a business leader. What's your company profit target? And how billable do your staff need to be to achieve that? This is your role as a business manager to ensure that the project pipeline is there to support that model. So at PreviousNext, we have an 80% billable target for our staff and a 20% non-billable time ratio. It works well for us. You can work out your own ratios. Importantly, you've got to let the developers define how they want to manage contribution and what to focus on. At the management level, we're only stepping in if there's something very strategic to get involved with, like Drupal CMS. So we're very involved in Experience Builder. And contribution should just be baked into your client projects. You patch something or write a new module for a client, that's on their billable time. And we used to worry about this in terms of client contracts, but these days we just do it by default. And if a client wants to work with one of the best companies, this is just how we work. And we're very pragmatic about contribution time. There's no downing tools to do contribution in the middle of an important project. And of course, we have gaps between project schedules that everyone understands is contribution time. And then we have scheduled things like quarterly hack days that the whole company can get involved with. Of course, you've got to make sure that everyone's tracking their contribution credits on Drupal.org. And once you've signed up as a certified partner, all of this counts towards your ranking. And importantly, you've got to play the long game. It might take a few months to get momentum to see results. Excuse me. But I heard a fantastic story last night from Mukesh, who's sitting here from InnerRaft. They were ticking along, I think it was 300 annual credits. You implemented a new contribution policy, and that's escalated up to 1,000 credits in a very short space of time, elevating you up to a gold certified partner status. And no, you can't game the credit system unless you want to end up with a terrible reputation in the Drupal community. And once all of this is underway, make sure you're documenting this policy in your company handbook or however you communicate that so that everyone in the company understands it. And then publicize it to the world. This will be a very key consideration in terms of good developers looking for new roles, and probably the single biggest thing that will make them choose you over a company that doesn't contribute. And beyond the policy itself, Other considerations include how you're using contribution in terms of onboarding new staff and then using it for professional development with your existing team members. And of course, there's HR tools you can track employee satisfaction and that type of thing, but we tend to just ask people how things are going. In terms of hiring new staff, the absolute first thing we always look at is someone's Drupal.org profile and what their contribution history is before we even progress to that next conversation. And then similarly, when we're evaluating someone's performance in terms of appraisal within the company, we're factoring in their contribution levels. And of course, once this is all flowing nicely, how much money are you now saving on recruitment firms? So for us, we've saved literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of recruitment. I can't remember the last time we needed to recruit an actual Drupal developer. And once you are effectively contributing, sharing it in talks at Drupal events like this and in blog posts is great marketing for your company, building your profile with both prospective clients and new staff. And this factors into who attends DrupalCons and camps from PreviousNext. So our long-standing policy is if you get a talk accepted to an event like this, then PreviousNext funds your attendance on paid company time. But we also make sure that all developers, no matter how junior, get the opportunity to attend local and regional events as it connects them deeper into the community, and our full team catches up in person around Drupal South events each year. And when you're talking with clients, how you're framing your contribution in terms of your certified partner status. So can you say that you're a platinum certified partner and what that means? And when they bring up things like security concerns, can you point to your team member who actually sits on the Drupal security team at the absolute bleeding edge of how to resolve issues? And can you talk to them about a certain module that you've contributed to that they need to use to integrate with a complex third-party system? All of these things just elevate your expertise in the eyes of a client, and if you're pitching against a taker with no contribution record, who are they going to choose unless you're being massively undercut on price? And then looking at your marketing budget, how are you dividing that up between your short-term objectives that you might have in your local market versus long-term objectives of Drupal bringing a globally trusted brand? Ensuring that a portion of your marketing budget is directed towards the Drupal Association is critical for Drupal's global brand recognition, which your company is going to benefit from in the long term. And finally, are there R&D programs that you can get funding or tax rebates for in your own country? So we have a very generous tax scheme in Australia for R&D, and we've run Drupal contribution through that over the years, and that in turn benefits all of the government organisations that are using Drupal in Australia, and it's about 30% of total government websites in Australia use Drupal. And of course, all the business managers in the room, they're sitting there going, what's all this cost? So in preparing this talk, I managed the finances for PreviousNext. I looked through 10 years of financial records. I counted up all of our marketing budget, the cost of attending all conferences, including all travel and accommodation, and not just Drupal conferences. And then I counted up the salaries for direct contribution times, the actual direct cost of wages. And the figure that I've found is that it's 4% of our total revenue. And of course, we treat these costs as normal operating expenses and declare our substantial profits, which we know could quadruple the industry average, on top of that. So 4%. In comparison with that, what are our recruitment costs over the past decade? A tenth of that, 0.4% of total revenue, almost exclusively to non-Drupal roles. So see what I mean about this making real business sense? And for non-code contribution, we do things like sponsored Drupal events like this. As part of our marketing budget, it cements our company's profile with potential clients and staff, but it also ensures that the Drupal brand is prominent in the market. And while a lot of agencies get hung up on short-term revenue on investments in an individual event and how many client leads they get, we take the long view, because if Drupal use grows and it's adopted by the best clients, PreviousNext ultimately benefits. And I'll just pause here because I know that we've had a lot of people from this region asking about when DrupalCon Asia would happen again. Well, we listened and it's here. But for an event like this to run each year, it needs committed support from regional agency sponsors to be sustainable. So a huge thanks to the companies that have sponsored in Singapore. But for those of you that didn't, now is your chance to talk to the Drupal Association about sponsoring the next event. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see that number. Is it 10? Yeah, so even if sponsoring is not your job responsibility, make sure that the people who make those decisions in your company understand how important this is. And I'd love to put DrupalCon Asia on my calendar of annual events alongside Europe and North America. And the choice as to whether that happens is in your hands. Now, volunteering at events is a great way to get your team to meet other attendees. You might have met Griffin on the right there this morning, handing out your name badge. And so the question here is, do you know when you're going to be talking to your next client or potential staff member? It might be at this registration desk when they're collecting their ticket from your own staff member. They might talk to a competitor and get some juicy intel on something that's going to help your business in the long term. And the point I want to make here is don't just think it's the business people in your company who can make those connections for you. Having multiple types of employees at Drupal events like this is really critical. And we're very happy to share our expertise at PreviousNext by mentoring things like the Code Sprint. I'm sure many of you might be there tomorrow. And you can read our PreviousNext blog where you'll find lots of tips on how anyone can become a better Drupal developer. Now, the traditional agency mindset is, that's our intellectual property. We need to keep that top secret. But our open source mindset is we want to see more great Drupal developers building solid projects for their own clients, enhancing Drupal's reputation as a trusted product. Because at the end of the day, some of those great developers might come and join us. They might not, but we're helping Drupal overall. And for someone like me who you'd never want to see near a line of code, I found great personal satisfaction in joining things like the Drupal South Committee and then subsequently the Drupal Association Board, helping the Drupal community be sustainable in the long term. And as Dries showed this morning, the Starshot initiative for Drupal CMS has really opened up a huge amount of opportunities to get involved at this level. So seek out where you have an interest and expertise that you can share. And you might even get to play ping pong with Dries during a workshop break. Now, this business expertise is exactly what we need in these committees and boards, because every dollar of profit that the Drupal Association makes, by law, goes back into helping Drupal, that in turn helps your business. And by way of example, the not-for-profit Linux Foundation pushes $180 million US back into Linux projects every year. And I'd love to see the DA get to even 10% of that level of funding. Now, it's all very well to talk about this at a Drupal event, but promoting Drupal at broader tech conferences is an opportunity to get the story to a much broader audience. So this is Baddy, my predecessor, doing just that at Web Summit in Lisbon last year, that has 70,000 attendees, and we back that up with a Drupal branded booth for people to then find out more about the product. So the Drupal Association is starting to facilitate this kind of thing at a product marketing level, but where you can step in is real-life case studies delivered by you as Drupal experts, maybe even introducing your own clients as part of that. That carries enormous weight with potential customers of proof of what's possible with Drupal. And if you're planning, if you're an agency that already contributes a bit to Drupal or is planning to, start the process to qualify as a certified partner. As you may have seen, Drupal.org now only promotes certified partners to ensure that the makers in our ecosystem receive the best visibility with potential clients, alongside a range of other benefits which are only going to increase over time. So to qualify, it's pretty easy. You just need to demonstrate a minimum number of contribution credits each year and a small annual fee based on your company size. So it doesn't matter whether you're a 5-person company or a 500-person company. And as those contribution credits grow, your ranking as a certified partner will also grow. And we're already starting to see clients specify that agencies must be certified partners to respond to their RFQs. So if there's one thing you're going to do to stay competitive, this is by far the best thing. And beyond that certified partner program, there's a range of other initiatives. So that can be as small as the adopted document program that was announced this morning, and Lenny sitting in the front here is the person to talk to. Put your hand up. And then larger programs like the Innovation and Marketing Funds. So these programs provide contribution credits that support your certified partner ranking, and again, all of those funds go back into directly making Drupal more innovative and a product that's better known in the market. So before I wrap up, here's 4 things. It was going to be 3, but now it's 4. So define and implement a contribution policy that all of your staff clearly understand. Number 2 is look at your marketing budget, see where you can sponsor Drupal events, make sure this event happens annually in this region, and then other Drupal Association initiatives. And if you enjoyed a talk like this, share your own experience, both with the Drupal community and the broader tech world. And by working together to raise the level of expertise and professionalism of our agencies, more clients are going to be attracted to Drupal, and everyone in this room will benefit. So I have just put on the BOF board if you want to talk more about this at 4 o'clock tomorrow, same time tomorrow. We can talk about the Certified Partner Program and then anything that I've raised in this talk. So I think we've got a couple of minutes for questions before the Splash Awards. Mukesh.
Thank you for the wonderful session, Owen. I have one question. You said that all the new joinees, you definitely look at a Drupal.org profile. We do that too. But how do you channelize, if they are not a lot into contribution yet, but very good developers, how do you channelize their energy into bringing that contribution culture?
Yeah, so like I said, our professional development of staff is intrinsically tied to contributions. So if someone's joining who doesn't have a lot of Drupal experience, we're taking them through contribution practices and coding standards to bring them up to the level that we need. So if you're contributing code to Drupal global standards, you're writing good Drupal code. And so that's how we're leveraging that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So comprehensive. You know everything now. Okay, so thanks for listening. We've got the Splash Awards straight after this. So good luck to everyone that's got entries there. And feel free to speak to any of us at PreviousNext about what we do and our hosting platform, Skipper. You're not going to find me on LinkedIn, but you can always email me if you want to reach out, and feel free to chat to me through the event. Thanks.